Good morning and welcome to the Fundraising Regulator's annual meeting. I'm Sasha Deshmukh and I'm a member of the Fundraising Regulator board and I'll be your chair for this morning. Before we begin, I'd like to thank those of you who are here joining us in person at the British Museum, as well as those joining on the live stream. The last time I was actually able to host an event in person for the Fundraising Regulator was in 2019. And so for me, reflecting back on that day has clearly highlighted how much more mature the regulator is now. And I think you'll hear more about that shortly. Before we begin, though, there are just a few housekeeping points that I need to share with you. For those of us who are here in person, we are not expecting any fire alarms, so if we do hear the tannoy asking us to evacuate, please follow British Museum staff who will help us and know what we need to do. And can I also ask everyone who's here in person to please keep your phones on silent for the meeting. To give you a brief outline of the morning's proceedings, the event is going to take the form of two parts. In the first part, you're going to hear from our chair, Lord Harris, and our Chief Executive, Gerald Oppenheim, about our achievements over the past financial year and about some of our future plans. Then they'll be joined on stage by the chairs of our three board subcommittees, and you'll get the opportunity to ask any questions. We're looking forward to a very lively Q&A session, so please do think of questions right the way through the morning. Those of you who are following on the live stream can use X to send in questions using the hashtag that you can see on the screen. After the question and answer session, we'll break for some refreshments, and during this time there'll also be an opportunity to find out more about joining one of the committees of our committees or joining the Fundraising Regulator board. And I'd like to recommend that anyone who is interested do genuinely think about joining our board. I'll be approaching the end of my term on the board next year, and I can say honestly that it's been an enormously rewarding experience. I would recommend it to anyone. After the break, there'll be a presentation by Nikki Renkin, our head of casework, on demystifying investigations. But in a moment, we'll hear from Lord Harris, but now I'd like to welcome Gerald Oppenheim, Chief Executive of the Fundraising Regulator, to talk a little about some of our achievements over the past year. Gerald.
Right, just get myself ready. Thanks, Sasha, and good morning to everyone in the room and joining us on the live stream. It's really good to be here in person once again. I'm going to reflect on the year that has just been before Lord Harris looks ahead to things to come that we're doing. In September 2022, we launched our 5-year strategic plan to ensure we are innovative, proactive, intelligent and collaborative in our approach to regulation. Today presents us with an opportunity to share with you how we've delivered against the strategic plan and how we will continue to do so in the year ahead. As with previous years, we found our caseload has continued to increase, this year by 8%. To accommodate the increasing number of complaints and a significant number of much more complex investigations generated from them, we added one new casework officer and a new case manager to the team. These additional posts help us ensure we maintain our relationships with charities that we engage with, as well as those contacting us with concerns. We're very pleased that this has made an impact, and we continue to close 94% of all cases within 4 weeks. We also appointed our first head of proactive regulation and projects, and Lord Harris will talk more about some of this work that he and his developing team have been doing next, so hold on for that. The 2022-23 year saw a levy payment rate of 98%, from charities spending £100,000 and more on their fundraising each year. We now have over 6,000 charities registered with us, a 7% increase on the previous year, and that's made up of around 2,000 levy-paying charities and around just over 4,000 other charities that spend less than £100,000 a year. At this event 2 years ago, we announced the launch of what we called our self-reporting pathway, which allows charities to tell us of potential breaches of the code or other issues connected to fundraising that they've experienced that we should know about. Last year, we had 20 self-reports, many in the final quarter of our 2022-23 year, and related to issues with subcontracting, and that's going to be covered by our market inquiry. Again, more about that in a few minutes from Lord Harris. Let me turn now to the Fundraising Preference Service, one of the key services we operate to protect the public, especially those who may be in vulnerable circumstances. Our FPS website and phone helpline enable people to request charities to stop direct marketing communications. In the year to the 31st of August 2023, FPS users logged a total of 6,851 suppressions. A third of those were made on behalf of someone else, and 739 of the requests were made on behalf of someone who had died. Numbers of FPS users continue to rise steadily as a result of increased public awareness of the service. And since the FPS was launched in July 2017, over 54,000 suppressions have been made by over 28,000 people. Let's turn now to the Code of Fundraising Practice, our core document. Last September, we launched the review of the Code of Fundraising Practice. We held a number of online and in-person engagement events in Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. We also conducted targeted engagement with key stakeholders. Oops, my slides are moving. With key stakeholders and spoke at events organised by those charity sector bodies. The consultation closed at the beginning of December. We had 150 responses from organisations, but within that 150, there are 4,500 separate comments on various parts of the code. That's a high level of that showed a high level of engagement, and we know from the analysis so far that there's a high level of support for the proposals to streamline the code, to move to principles-based rules, to replace rules where we are not the lead regulator with signposting to the relevant legislation and guidance provided by one of those other regulators. Our internal committees have approved the proposed approach to the new code as it will be, and we're now busy redrafting and seeking legal advice on the content ahead of a second consultation on the redrafted code, which will take place later this year. This will give you a chance to see what it looks like and to let us know how you find it to use before we produce the definitive version to launch next year. Protections that appear in the current code will be retained, but the principles-based approach will allow for wider interpretation in the context of new fundraising approaches, as well as societal and digital technology changes since the last full code review in 2018 to 2019. The current code came into being in October 2019. We're also going to produce supplementary guidance to support the implementation of the new code. This may include best practice advice on areas such as due diligence, monitoring, EDI, and running events. We'll also be looking at ways to make the entire code more accessible, easier to navigate, and with an improved glossary. When the new code is launched, just as we did in 2019, there'll be a 6-month grace period for charities to update any processes that they need to update to align with the new code. The casework team will start to investigate complaints using the new code rules in full after the 6-month period, but there will need to be some flexibility depending on the nature and timing of the issue relating to the matter being raised with us. Let's turn now to the annual complaints report. Last October, we published the most recent annual complaints report, this year observing that as charities returned to door-to-door fundraising for the first time, this method generated more complaints than any other method, both to us as a regulator and to charities themselves. We also found that misleading information in marketing materials was also a common recurring theme in complaints. Marketing activity related to online and digital fundraising received the most complaints in this category, consistent with the previous year in 2021-22. In addition to publishing the annual complaints report, we also looked in more detail at complaints handling and ran a survey, complaints handling survey, to help us identify whether we could improve our reporting on fundraising complaints data from charities. We had a large response, and the survey found that most respondents recommended that we should increase the current sample size in the second part of the ACR to represent the charity sector more accurately. The survey found that respondents wanted us to find new ways to present data about how charities handle fundraising complaints. There's a lot for us to unpack there from the survey results, and taking into account the majority of views, we've decided that the time has come for us to make some changes to the annual complaints report. We'll publish the 2023-24 ACR for the year ending 31 March 2024 later this year, as planned. However, we'll then pause publication for up to 2 years, as we have recently explained in a blog on our website. This pause will allow us to make changes to improve the way in which we report complaints data from charities to reflect the survey findings, but we'll continue to publish our own findings, our own data in the meantime. Looking out for the fundraising badge, the logo that says registered with the Fundraising Regulator, is a key part of our safer giving advice for the public. After a dedicated digital marketing campaign, we felt the time was right to review the level of public awareness of the badge, and we partnered with NFP Research to look specifically at this. The results were very encouraging. We found that 61% of 2,200 respondents would be more likely to think positively of a charity showing the fundraising badge. 73% would be more confident in supporting a charity displaying the badge. 51% were more likely to support a charity they had never heard of if it was displaying the badge. And 28% had checked that a charity was registered with us before making a donation. As part of the same research, we asked about public awareness of the Fundraising Regulator. Again, we last looked at this in 2018-2019. In the earlier research, 2 years after we had launched and we were set up, awareness levels measured 7%. Since then, recognition has nearly trebled, with 20% of respondents to the survey having heard of the Fundraising Regulator, so 1 in 5 of those 2,200 in the survey. In addition to engaging with the public directly through marketing activities, we've also found that our volume of press engagement has increased steadily, which also speaks to our role as a maturing and trusted regulator with something to say. We'll continue to develop our work on public engagement to ensure the public is aware of our role and the many ways in which we can support them, as well as obviously supporting good fundraising by charities. We've also been active in Wales and Northern Ireland, both through our board members for those 2 countries and staff members who operate in Wales and Northern Ireland. In Wales, we've forged strong links with the Welsh Government Minister for the Third Sector, Jane Hutt, and her officials. We've been able to keep her up to date regularly on our activities supporting charities in Wales. With ever more Welsh charities looking to diversify their income streams, good regulation has never been more important to support them. We regularly partner with organisations in Wales to share our work. For example, presenting to membership organisations such as the NHS Wales Regional Group of Charities, providing key updates through the WCVA newsletter, and meeting levy-paying charities to better understand the trends they are seeing in their own sector. In Northern Ireland, we're working with NICVA and the Charity Commission for Northern Ireland to strengthen fundraising regulation, using our respective websites to provide information about our role, to highlight good practice and to provide blogs and specific information about our work relevant to Northern Ireland charities, such as the Code Review, most obviously, and the Market Inquiry. With the Charity Commission Northern Ireland, with NICVA, the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, and the Rural Community Network in Northern Ireland, as well as local rural community networks, we're exploring how best to communicate with small and micro rural charities, which are often trustee or volunteer-led, on how they want to receive information and advice from us and CCNI as they seek to fundraise to manage some tight financial constraints that they face, whilst adhering to the code. And that applies to all of them, whether they're registered with us or not. So, in conclusion, our regulation is there to support organisations wherever they are on their fundraising journey. We'll continue to work with the sector in those countries, as well as England, and so far as our coverage extends in Scotland, to ensure fundraisers are supported and that fundraising standards remain high. We will also continue to work closely with colleagues on the Scottish Fundraising Adjudications Panel, some of whom I think are in the live stream this morning. We very much value the partnership and through it the opportunity to talk to fundraisers and charities in Scotland. To close, I'd like to now remind you to save a date for just over a year's time for the next event, which will take place, we think, in May 2025. Look out for details a little nearer the time, obviously. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to the board and the committees of the board, the staff team, as well as those we work with, including in particular the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, the country voluntary sector councils, NCVO, WCVA, NICVA and so on, the charity commissions in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, the Scottish Charity Regulator, and all the other regulatory bodies that we engage with very much more than we did 6 or 7 years ago. I'd also like to thank DCMS officials and ministers for their support, as well as many others who give us their time to support what we do. I'd now like to hand over to Lord Toby Harris, Chair of the Board, who's going to talk about some more recent developments, including our first market inquiry. Toby.
Well, thank you very much, Gerald, and good morning, everybody. So, it's nothing to do with fish, but we live in a tuna world. For those of you who know the acronym, that's turbulent, uncertain, novel, and ambiguous. And I think that's certainly true for the charitable fundraising sector. Every charity represented here today has had to face challenging conditions as the significant global events impact on their work, and as we've seen the cost of living crisis impact on both their work, but their donors, and also their own activities. Many of the challenges you face are new, such as technological change, and there are significant uncertainties ahead, not least because of a looming general election. All of this, in turn, affects the way we need to regulate the sector, and the way we need to look at fundraising. That's why last year we established our proactive regulation team. It's a new initiative for the Fundraising Regulator, making us better able to monitor and promote sector compliance with the Code of Fundraising Practice. We set all this out in our strategic plan that runs to 2027. The aim of this team is to deliver a risk and intelligence-led programme of work to explore emerging or unaddressed issues about charity fundraising so they can be addressed before they crystallise. As this work develops, we will be sharing the learning and insights from the work with the sector. And the first significant project as part of this new move, this more proactive approach, has been our market inquiry, launched to look into issues relating to the use of subcontractors to fundraise by charities. Now, you will have seen some of the news coverage arising from the way some subcontractors have been operating. And the aim of the inquiry has been to better understand how door-to-door and on-street fundraising subcontracting relationships are arranged and monitored in the sector. Those of you who have read our recent blog on the subject know that we held a number of workshops with charities and agencies to get a full understanding of the issues. And we're very grateful to everyone who has attended and shared their insights, and to the Chartered Institute who hosted the in-person events with us. Now, I understand that the feedback was very positive from all attendees who welcomed the opportunity to talk to us directly, so you can expect more of this sort of engagement in the future. Now, I know that you will actually want to know the outcome of the inquiry, which we hope to publish in full within the next few weeks. While I can't share all the findings with you now, I can confirm that there will be recommendations for all charities and agencies involved in such in subcontracted face-to-face fundraising. Given some of the stories that we've heard and that many of you will have read about recently, I am sure this will come as no surprise. Our inquiry looked in detail at all aspects of the subcontracting and subcontracting process. This has included the arrangements for the contracts themselves and due diligence carried out right the way through to licensing and payment models. It's looked at training and monitoring as well as exit clauses and complaints handling. The report is covering each of these elements and is rooted in what we heard from the charities and agencies we spoke to. And of course, it will set out our response as a regulator. And as I said, that report will be published very soon. Now I want to move on to another topic. As you'll be aware, we have had to announce that we need to increase the yearly levy we ask charities to pay to fund our work. This is the first time we have done this since we were founded. The need for this reflects the very rapidly changing environment in which charitable fundraising operates, including the proliferation of new and novel approaches to fundraising that are emerging with new technologies. The aim throughout, however, is to enable us to continue providing the proportionate self-regulation of the sector so that public trust in charitable fundraising can be maintained and promoted. The review closed on the 9th of February. Since then, we have been analysing the responses and considering the key themes and findings. First of all, I would like to thank the 222 organisations who took the time to respond. It's fair to say that the responses present a mixed reaction. So we're thinking carefully about what will be introduced. The issues we're looking at include whether the fee proposals were set at the right level, whether the proposed increase for small charity registration from £50 to £60 is acceptable, how we manage the need for all future increases, and whether to introduce the increases in phases or not. The board will soon consider the consultation replies and decide the outcome, and we will announce the decision next month so that we can advise levy-paying charities of the outcome and what their levy will be from the 1st of September on the usual timescale. As Gerald mentioned earlier, last year we were at 98% for levy collection. that is a tribute to the sector's maturity and support for the principle of regulation. We appreciate and value this, as we have done in the past, and we look forward to it continuing in the future. As I said earlier, although our remit remains the same as in 2016, the context in which we work is changing because fundraising itself is changing. And fundraising is changing because it is taking place in a world that is also changing and developing fast. That means we need to invest in regulation so that it continues to happen, so that it continues to support charities and continues to protect the public, so that charities can continue to enjoy public trust. And that is our fundamental purpose, the maintenance of public trust in the fundraising that you do. We need to make sure that as a regulator, we're in the best shape for 2030 and not rooted in a model developed in the environment of 2016. That's why the market inquiry has been so important. And that is why it is so necessary, for example, for us to work with you on understanding the pros and cons of AI in a fundraising context. Our objective is to be able to continue to regulate well and proportionately in the years ahead with a code and guidance that are up to date and relevant. We are committed to doing this in cooperation with all of you here today and all of you tuning in, so that we don't have to find we have to take regulatory action in a vacuum. We've got a busy year ahead of us, and the areas I've highlighted touch on just some of the things on which we will have to focus. I want to conclude by thanking my fellow board members and committee members, to thank the staff team for their dedication and skill in ensuring that fundraising is being properly regulated. But above all, I want to express my gratitude to everyone in the fundraising sector, our regulatory counterparts and the sector representative bodies for their support in the past year, and I look forward to continued engagement and collaboration. Thank you, and I think it's back to Sasha.
Thank you very much, Toby. And don't go far, Toby, because you're going to stay on stage. And in fact, joining Toby here on stage, Gerald will be coming back. But also we have some more of our Fundraising Regulator Board colleagues. So I'd like to invite those to come up onto the stage and I shall introduce you. So, of course, Gerald and Toby, everyone already knows, but for those of you who don't, I'm delighted to be joined up here on the stage for the question and answer by Jenny Williams, who is the chair of the Complaints and Investigation Committee of the board, by Kieran James, who's standing in for Jill Thompson, the chair of our Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, who sadly can't be here, but Kieran is both a member of the board and a member of that committee, and by Suzanne McCarthy, who is the chair of the Standards Committee of our board. Now, I'd like to open questions to everyone who is here and also to everyone who is on the live stream. If you do have a question, please do raise your hand, and we have a couple of my colleagues who have microphones here in the room who will come and join you. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll come to you in just a moment. We have actually almost the same number of people, about 70 or so people on the live stream as we do here in the room. So one of my colleagues will also be monitoring the questions from the live stream. And Daisy, I'll bring you in if you raise your hand when you have questions from the live stream as well. I have got a couple of questions that have already come in, so I might start with those, but please do raise your hand in the room. And Daisy, please start monitoring the questions online. If you are asking a question, please could you say who you are and which organisation you're from? And I also just urge everyone, please do ask a question and keep it quite concise so that we can try and get through as many as we can. So while I think some people in the room are thinking of questions and some people online, I'll go to some of the first questions that we have in. And Kieran, perhaps I think this is a question that relates to some of the areas of finance. So I may just start with yourself, and obviously Gerald, please do come in on any questions, and Toby as well, if you'd like to add anything at any point. But Kieran, the question that we've had is, the organisation, of course, keeps a reserves level, but also does have income that comes from the annual levy. Do you have any comment on the reserves level that you keep and why you think this reserves level matters?
Thanks, Sasha. Yes. 2022, 2023, we actually had a planned deficit, but finished the year with a small surplus. So currently, the reserves are higher than we anticipated. They're likely to decrease by around £400,000 over the coming year, largely due to an increasing complement of staff that we have that's gone from 24 to 30. I think at that point when that reserve is decreased by £400,000, will probably be at a normal operating level for the reserve in terms of the operating cost that we have, which is around 6 months. That answers the question.
Thank you, Kieran. Are there questions in the room? I have another online question, but I can't see a hand. I can see one. I've never seen fundraising colleagues so shy in my entire life. But we have a question just here. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte Wildermoth from the Woodland Trust. My question's probably for Suzanne. In terms of I know you're analysing the responses for the code review. Were there any sort of trends that stood out that were a surprise?
Thank you, Charlotte. Suzanne?
I'm going to start, but then I'm going to ask Paul also, who's the executive head, because he's obviously closer to having reviewed all the 4,000 odd that came in, the comments. But what was reassuring was that so many were in favour of producing a principles-based code, not entirely principles-based. There will be some codes that have to remain restricted, but also an eagerness to make a code that was relevant and would remain flexible, not only for fundraisers, but also for the fundraising regulator in trying to apply it to complaints that we may receive. And also the fact that we wanted to move into other areas. How people give has changed. AI has changed. How fundraising charities need to be aware of protecting their staff. And all these issues came up as areas we wanted to look at. And I think what I would also say is that there was a receptiveness to knowing that the code would move more to principles-based, but at the same time, the need for good guidance. And that has been very important. And I was, in fact, talking to Paul today that we are bringing in someone who is a specialist in creating guidance. And when we have the draft code, once we've gone through, and we have gone through all the thousands of comments, we're going to go out again into consultation. And that will allow people to see what the code actually will read like, as opposed to the concepts that may actually be put within it. I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything?
Could you just pass the microphone to Paul? That would be great. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you. Not much to add to what Suzanne said there. I mean, in terms of actual trends, I guess the key things that's come through is the need for us to keep pace with sort of, things like contactless payments, top-up fees, and that type of thing. So as Suzanne said, sort of changes in the way fundraisers fundraise, essentially. But I'd say they're probably the key themes, along with, obviously, the whole idea of us moving towards a more principles-based framework, which, broadly speaking, is well supported.
Thank you, Paul. I have one more online question that's come in, but is there another question in the room? There's three, actually, I can see. So I'll do the online question first, but if a microphone could go just over here and then just ready there, that would be great. So the online question for, I think, Jenny, is that the questioner had read about, and indeed just heard this morning, about planned changes to the annual complaints report. Do you think this should include making the data more interactive in the ways that it's presented so it could be more useful for the sector?
Yes, that's very much our ambition.
Sorry, would you mind using your microphone just to align?
Sorry. Yes, that's very much our intention. We consulted on what people wanted out of the ACR, how we could improve it. And this was one of the factors that came out of that. We want to make the data much more interact in the sense of people being, charities being able to submit the data and us being able to take it much more automatically. And we also want to make it available in a form that means that other people can analyse it, dip into it, and use it in whatever way is most useful for them. So yes, this is very much one of the reasons why we're taking a pause and almost going back to basics, trying to work out how to make it more useful for everyone.
Thank you, Jenny. Jake, the question just over here towards the front.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Edward Horner from Operation Smile. You'd mentioned that the Proactive Regulation Unit was about to release their results for the current investigation of subcontractors. Do you have any idea what the next area of focus will be for them?
Gerald, would you like to take that? And others do come in with thoughts as well.
I mean, the market inquiry was a very specific response to a set of circumstances that became apparent recently. A couple of the other projects that are in development at the moment, they're not ready to go yet. We're having a look at a number of issues that have come up through casework originally around charities that do child sponsorship, and where members of the public have a number of issues and concerns about how that works. Not that it's wrong or misplaced or anything like that, but how it works. So we'll be having a look at that. And we also have just started to reach out to a number of commercial organisations, retailers, to look at how they support charities in the very many different ways they do it, through having their Charity of the Year or allowing collections inside the department store, whatever it may be. So those are a couple of examples of things in development.
I mean, I think it's worth saying that the market inquiry in response to the concerns about subcontracting and the fact that there isn't a clear line of sight to what people are doing on the public's doorsteps and the charity and the charity trustees, so they don't know what's happening, was us responding to what we were picking up as concerns, and then were being picked up by some news media in respect of specific charities and specific fundraisers. So that's the sort of thing we ought to be doing in terms of being proactive. But we'd already decided to do this before those concerns arose, and we're looking at a number of other areas. And part of what we want to do is have a better capacity for picking up intelligence from across the sector, what's being said around the country about charitable fundraising, to identify issues before they become a problem for charities and before they become raised with us as complaints. And that's very much the objective of what we're doing.
Thank you. There was a question just here in the middle. Thank you.
Hi, thank you from Blackboard. Gerald, you talked about the sort of peer collaboration across the UK, with partners across the UK. Of course, many charitable organisations are fundraising globally, and of course, there are many international charities that are fundraising from constituents in the UK, and increasingly sort of global privacy payments regulation that spans borders. So just wondering if you could share to what extent you're collaborating with partners around the world, and indeed to what extent are there peer fundraising regulatory bodies to engage with around the world? Well,
that's a really interesting question. A little bit.
You're not going on a world tour, Gerald.
Damn. Hopes are dashed. Not very much goes on. I think there are a number of reasons for that. I've certainly engaged with a number of bodies in the mainland of Europe that are sometimes actually less about regulation as we would do it and understand it in the UK, and more about self-regulation of bits of different aspects of the fundraising profession, if you like. So those organisations that do door-to-door fundraising have, there are a number of in-country associations that represent them. But I think, and again, this comes out of a conversation with former colleague here, Peter Hills-Jones, who's now running the Public Fundraising Regulatory Authority in Australia. Peter reckons that the models we have in the UK, not just the fundraising regulator, but the charity commissions across the 4 countries, it's actually quite a unique model that doesn't really find an echo directly elsewhere. But I think there are ways and means of trying to reach out and explain more about what we're about, why it's important, why we think it works, and to learn more about how other people do it. But as far as I know, we're pretty unique.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got an online question which I'll go to in just a second, which is actually for Toby and Gerald. Can I just see if there are any hands in the room as well, just so that we can prepare the microphones? I think people are still thinking in the room. The online question, though, is there one? Oh, that's fantastic. If the mic could just go up there ready for just a second's time. The online question, though, is for Toby and Gerald. Recognising that the organisation is non-partisan, do you think, though, that the upcoming year and any potential change in government will change the environment for fundraising regulation in the UK?
Well, clearly, it's an important principle that we're not partisan. Obviously, all board members have their own political views, and some of us express them more publicly than others. But but the reality will be that the situation that the charities and the fundraising sector find themselves in is not going to change overnight. It's going to continue to be a difficult situation. There's going to be a lot of technological change is not going to stop. I suspect the financial position is going to be a long time in changing. So what I do hope is that when the dust settles after the forthcoming election, there will be more generally a more positive attitude towards the role of the charitable sector, but also one which doesn't make assumptions as to what they can and can't do, and is also, I think one of the difficulties that has affected the workload of the fundraising regulator, it's certainly affected the workload of the Charity Commission, has been the extent to which complaints have been generated about charities which are there because people disagree with something that the charity is doing, not with the substance of what is being done or the how it's being done. And that certainly takes up a lot of time in terms of going through those complaints and making and identifying whether there is substance there. I hope that we can get back to a situation where charitable endeavour is seen as non-political itself rather than as means for making a political point.
Thank you, Toby. Gerald, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think, at official level, we've always enjoyed very good working relationships with the team at DCMS. And what we found in the last year or two, helpfully often brokered by DCMS, is that our engagement with other departments in Whitehall has started to increase. So we were consulted over the digital marketing consumers bill that's in Parliament at the moment. We've engaged with officials at the Department of Business and Trade on that. Also through them with the CIC regulator. So I think as we become more established and people understand what our role is as a voluntary independent regulator, our ability to take part in wider discussions that perhaps 5 or 6 years ago we wouldn't have been part of, is recognition, I think, that the role charities play and therefore why it's important that they fundraise well and effectively is becoming more appreciated and understood, even if some of the actions that may come out of, for example, particular bits of legislation still potentially can make things difficult for charities. But I hope we can play our part working with officials to make those concerns understood and to perhaps play a small part, at least, in improving the way things may happen in future.
Thank you, Gerald. I'll go to the questioner just towards the back of the room. Thank you.
Hi, Claire Haskins from Quorum. So there's obviously been some changes in the returns to the Charity Commission. We noticed in our recent return around fundraising and how that's reported. And of course, we report our complaints in our statutory accounts as well. How much alignment is there between you and them on those changes, did you feed in at all?
Gerald, yes.
I think that probably falls to me to answer. We engage with officials at the Charity Commission an awful lot, and when they're minded to make changes to the annual return, we certainly are part of that, because in order to understand what charities are spending on fundraising, to put it, at its minimum requirement, we need to know what they're spending. We need to understand how that affects the way we construct the levy each year. But there's also a wider set of issues, and you mentioned the reporting that you do in your statutory accounts and annual report for charities in England and Wales that spend that have an income rather of £1 million or more. There are a number of reporting requirements around complaints, around policies on vulnerability and so on, that are also important. It's important to us because we can understand from those details, those returns, what the wider environment looks like that you're dealing with, as well as ours. So we do feed into this. We do have a very active relationship with the Commission and with colleagues in Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, so far as concerned.
Thank you. Again, if there are questions in the room, please do raise your hands and we can move the microphones around. There's a question, I think, coming online, which Daisy can bring us to. If we could just have a microphone here for Daisy to read out. Thank you.
Thanks, I've got two actually.
Two, great.
Okay. So the first one is about the levy, and it says something like, can you tell us any more about responses to the levy review? And then the second question is about the FPS, which is that the graph showed that the numbers of people using the FPS is going up, but the charities on the published list also is going up on the website.
Gerald, do you want to pick up both of those or one of those?
Yep, I'll start. If I take the FPS one first, there are, as I said in the presentation I made, the numbers are increasing. I mean, not hugely, but at a reasonable pace, and that's partly to do with awareness of the service itself and the fact that if you have a family member who is vulnerable, or you have a family member who's died, and you want to tell charities that that's happened, then FPS is a very good, convenient way of doing that. What we've noticed recently is that there are more charities that people are asking suppress contact with them. There are some issues around that because some of those charities are relatively small, not the big fundraising charities, and there may be issues there about whether the right charity is being picked and so on, which we're going to look at again to see if we can make some improvements and changes there. But FPS is a dynamic system in that way. It was born out of the reason why we were created back in 2015-16, and we continue to look at how it operates in order to make it work better, both for the public that uses it and for charities that need to collect the suppressions when they're made. So I think maybe not this year, but into next year, there may be some more changes and improvements that we make to the way that happens to make it smoother. And one big change for members of the public that has been brought in was when FPS started, you could only make 3 suppressions in one go. You can now do up to 10 in one go, so you don't have to keep going into the system anew. That said, I don't think there's any evidence that FPS is acting as a brake in any way on charity fundraising, but it is there to support people who genuinely don't want to hear about marketing from charities to do with their fundraising, and as I say, for people who other family members, let's say, regard as vulnerable and in need of some protection. If I just go to the levy question, as Toby was saying in his presentation, 222 responses, very easy number to remember. We're analysing those at the moment. We're going back to the board at the end of the month, just before Easter, for the board to be able to take a decision on what it will do, and we'll announce that during April so that everybody's clear what the response to the consultation has been. It's, as Toby said in his presentation, it's quite mixed. In some cases, it's quite hard to draw definitive conclusions as to what the charity sector within that 222 respondents is saying. So there will be some judgments that will have to be made, and Toby gave some illustrations of what those might be. But I think it's probably better I say no more about that before the board has had a chance to look at this in the round later in the month.
Thank you, Gerald. There's a question just there in the middle, and I have another one online. So just while the microphone is going, I'll do the online one first. And I think, Kieran, I might direct this to you. There's been some talk during speeches about big future trends that are already arriving, for example, changing technology and artificial intelligence. Does the regulator think that these are only changing fundraising practice, or could they also be useful for improving the way the regulator itself works? And are you looking at these kind of trends?
Excellent question. The answer is yes, we are. It's sometimes hard to keep up with the pace of the change in things like AI. ChatGPT is yet to reach its second birthday, which I find extraordinary when you think about the advances there. So keeping on top of all of this stuff is clearly challenging, and we're very aware of this and created a futures group to be looking at this kind of work very specifically. And yes, in answer to the question, we are looking at both of those aspects, how we can deploy things like machine learning to better inform decision-making within the regulator and support the work of the regulator, and indeed charities as well. But also the challenges around things like images generated in mid-journey or whatever it might be that are used in less than favourable circumstances to mislead and so on. So tremendous amount of work to undertake. We are, as well as that futures group meeting regularly, we're also inviting eminent people to come and speak and present to us and share views and thoughts too.
Thank you, Kieran. Manipulated images for mysterious reasons, all very timely in the news at the moment. There's a question just there towards 2/3 of the way back. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Anna Mowbray from the Charities Aid Foundation. A very similar question, actually, which is I wondered if you could share any insights about the most common use cases of AI in fundraising and the kinds of things you're expecting to see.
Thanks. Just in case anyone couldn't quite hear the question, that was just asking, and many of the panel might have some reflections about any of the trends that we are seeing in terms of maybe technological trends more broadly that are coming up in cases and investigations.
That would be Jenny.
Jenny, would you like, Jenny and Gerald, maybe have some thoughts?
I mean, apart from the problem of
Jenny, sorry, you wouldn't just be able to hold the microphone a little bit closer.
Sorry, I'm not very good at this. Right. So far, in terms of the investigations, AI, GPT hasn't, as it were, hit yet much. We have problems. We've had a limited amount of problems with terms of people producing evidence, as yet photographic evidence, trying to work out whether it's reliable or not. But that's been a fairly minor part of our work to date, but it's what's looming over the horizon on that front.
I'm just going to speculate about the extent to which AI will be used to micro-target potential donors. And whilst that may be efficient, and it may mean that you don't get bothered by charities with which you are unlikely to have any interest, I think there will be some people who will have ethical concerns about the way in which their name has emerged from the process. Now, we don't know how that will happen, but I think it's those sorts of things that we need to be abreast of and aware of, and a dialogue between ourselves and the sector in terms of the techniques that you're looking at, the techniques that you're thinking about, I think is going to be very important as a part of that.
Gerald,
yeah, just one thing to add. Inevitably, with the advent of all these new technological advances for good in many cases, there will be a number of individuals around who will seek to misuse this, and there is obviously something to watch for there in terms of fundraising purporting to be on behalf of an appeal or a charity which may not be. And there are going to be some challenges, I think, around spotting those bad actors, as it were, and that's important both in terms of maintaining public trust and confidence in the way charities fundraise. It's important for charities themselves because they won't want to be spoofed in any way that detracts from the fundraising they're doing. So I think there's an awful lot that we, between all of us, need to watch for and respond to as needed.
I just want to add that the code review, the consultation, did ask questions generally about these technological advances like AI. And it's important to remember that with a principles-based code, it's much more flexible. It's more able to handle these sort of technological developments without having to have a new consultation or new codes added. But the important thing, I think, is also to be able, and the fundraising regulator, I know, is very serious about this, is including guidance. And there may be, for example, while not a specific code on AI, because AI is a type of fundraising, and so other codes will obviously be able to cover it. But it may be helpful to have some specific guidance on that, or a blog, or some way of communicating. And I think that's the important thing, to see the code as a living document, which is also supplemented by other ways of helping fundraisers fundraise ethically and in a way that is in accordance with, presumably, their charity's values.
Thank you, Suzanne. I've got a couple of online questions. And there's another question just here in the room, which I'll go to first.
Hi, Claire Haskins from Quorum again. Just a quick one on the proactive activity, and you're sort of saying you are interested in hearing from us. I appreciate when you do a specific consultation, it's quite clear how we take part in that. But are you going to have a way for the sector to report to you issues that we become aware of, given the fast-changing environment?
Gerald, do you want to pick that up? How should the sector get in touch with things it thinks the FR should know about?
You know where we are. We're always very happy to be contacted and to have a dialogue with an individual charity or a group of charities about issues that you're experiencing that we may know about, we may not know about. I said in my presentation that if it relates to something where you think your charity may have experienced something that is reputationally harmful in your fundraising, or potentially so, then there is a self-reporting pathway that you can find on our website to do that, which will take it straight into the casework team. If it's a more general consideration, one of the things that we want to do, not just as part of proactive regulation, but also because it's the right thing to do, is to, now that we're all through 2 very strange years, engage much more directly with fundraisers and the issues they're dealing with. We're talking to the Chartered Institute of Fundraising at the moment about how best that could happen, because CIOF is reconstituting, I should say, its own internal panels and committees and interest groups. So we want to engage with those very much more widely as well. And we hope that would be a genuine positive 2-way engagement to, better, both parties better informing each other.
Thank you, Gerald. Daisy, it's a question from online, I think.
Yeah, this is just a question asking for more information about the focus groups that I think were part of the code consultations.
Suzanne?
Yes, I'll just say a little bit about this. It's important we hear from fundraisers. You all know that. And we're appreciative that so many of you engage with us on the code consultation process, which continues. But it's also very important that we hear from the public. And as a result of that, we actually commissioned some market research, which involves some 3,000 members of the public, both by poll and by focus group. And all of that information is again going into the mix, which will come out hopefully with a lovely drafted code that you'll all see in the second consultation, which will happen later this year. So we are aware and sensitive to the fact that while we need to hear from you, we need to hear from those who give to you or are interested in giving to you, of how they feel. And you heard from Gerald when he gave his talk about how having the badge being aware of the fundraising regulator actually helps fundraising, and fundraising is necessary for all the things that you do. So I hope that we will continue to talk to the public. It's more difficult, obviously, than being able to get a sector that is self-defined and able to engage. But we have found a way of doing that, and I think it's been extremely helpful.
I have a couple of online questions I'll come to in just a second. I'm going to check. Yes, there's a question just in the middle of the room there and one towards the back. So let's start within the room, actually. So if we just go there, then I'll have an online question and then come to the gentleman at the back.
Hello, I'm James. I'm from Asthma and Lung UK. So we already talked about a tuna environment that we are in at the moment, and obviously charities having to make some really tough choices at the moment in terms of what they can fund, what they can't fund. And I just wondered if and you already talked as well about the regulator being fit for 2024 rather than when it was first established. So I wondered if there was anything that you can tell us that the regulator has been doing to make sure that you are delivering value for money for us as an organisation, making sure you are as effective as possible in this modern world, and if there is anything as a result that you have stopped doing that you were doing back in when you were established.
It's a great question, James. Thank you. Gerald, do you want to pick that one up?
Okay, I think a lot of the value for money is something that everybody needs to be concerned with, and we certainly are in terms of the way we watch and monitor our expenditure. What we've sought to do through the strategic plan launched 18 months or so ago is to do that so that we have what we're calling the proactive regulation function that reaches out to charities, as the market inquiry did. We had very positive discussions with charities to try and hear from you directly what you're experiencing so that we can understand that better, reflect that better in the way we do our work. The whole approach to reshaping the code and the guidance that goes with it is a core part of that, so that you are, as charities collectively that fundraise, in a better place to do that well and effectively. Whilst as a regulator, as the chair was saying, we look to make sure public trust is where it should be at a high level. That takes resource. That means, delving into the detail of casework and complaints, many of which are becoming much, much more complicated than they were 5, 6, 7 years ago, and certainly since the pandemic ended. So there's all of that. It's quite hard to pin down, precise, answers to the value for money question on that. But if you take it as a whole, and the fact that we are still operating and will continue to operate even when next September the levy will increase, we're still operating within the parameters that were set by the committee that looked into fundraising regulation back in 2015. We've not moved very far away from that. We know that obviously if you're thinking about a levy increase, it's never the right time to do it because of the pressures that you rightly illustrated are affecting all charities in one way or another. We will always look at what we're doing, and if our budgets are under pressure in year, there will be things that we do not at all or do later when the resource is there. I mean, I don't think there's a magic answer to the question. We do what any organisation would do, which would be to keep it under review and to decide when we can do things.
But it's also keeping under review what we do at the moment and whether it's fit for purpose, whether it's useful to the sector or to the public. And there was mention earlier on, I think, in Gerald's remarks about the changes to the annual complaints report. Now, that's because messages have been received very clearly saying, this is not quite what we need something slightly different, therefore we're changing it and looking at that and trying to do so in the most cost-effective way. We reviewed the operation of the fundraising preference service some while ago and introduced a number of changes to overall have an impact downwards on the cost while also making it more usable for the public. That's the way you would expect us to operate, and that's what we do.
I've got an online question, but actually I think I'll go to the second question in the room been very patient, and then I'll do the online one. So over here, please.
Thank you. Robert Marsh, Combat Stress with the Veterans Mental Health Charity. Given the recent controversy with Great Ormond Street, as reported in the Sunday Times, the Monday following that report, most of my team, many of whom are seasoned fundraisers, were furious that this yet again erodes trust and confidence in charities and makes their job more difficult. As part of the exec, we issued a reassurance to our board that we don't take part in those activities, namely unsolicited knocking on people's doors or indeed chugging, and they were reassured. Rather than lifting the levy and spending more on dealing with complaints, and you've already alluded to it, Toby, the subcontracting of subcontracting, which by its very nature is uncontrollable, when will you regulate against these activities and, in common parlance, ban them?
Toby or Gerald, I mean, there may obviously only be a limit to what you can say ahead of the inquiry publication, but would you like to say any reflections?
Well, I think the first thing is wait for the inquiry report. I think it's also about shining a light on these practices and ensuring that charities recognise the reputational damage they are not only, well, the reputational damage that is being done to the sector, but more particularly the reputational damage that is being done to themselves if they don't have proper monitoring of the arrangements. And the difficulty, as you say, with contracting and subcontracting is that, and I referred to it earlier, there isn't a line of sight between the trustees or the senior management or the management of the charity with what is being done in their name. And that is where we've got to make sure that you can feel confident. You've got to make sure you can feel confident in what is being done in your name. If somebody turns up on my doorstep, says they're from such and such a charity or representing such and such a charity, I assume they're acting on behalf of that charity. It's important, therefore, that they behave in a way which is appropriate. Now, we will be publishing our reports. It will give, I hope, set some parameters for everyone. And I hope that all charitable fundraising will think very carefully about how they maintain that line of sight and that confidence in what is being done in their name.
Thank you. I'm just checking if there are any more questions in the room. I have a last couple of online questions and we're approaching the end of the time. So one final question here in the room, please, and then we'll take the online questions. And I think then we will, I'm afraid, have to wrap up the Q&A in just a moment.
Edward Horner from Operation Smile again. I was curious about what was driving the complexity, the increasing complexity in the cases that you were reviewing recently.
Jenny, would you like to take that?
Yes. One of the factors is the one that Toby Harris alluded to in his remarks, which is people using fundraising, as it were, by carrying on the war by another means. So they've got a dispute with the charity, what the charity is doing or how it's doing it. They're using fundraising, as it were, as the weapon, where really that's not what it's fundamentally driving it. That obviously, there may still be a kernel of a fundraising problem there. So we can't just say it's out of remit, because it may well be within remit. So trying to tread that line between, it's not for us to take sides in whatever the substantive philosophical or policy dispute is. Trying to focus carefully on the what is actually genuinely a possible fundraising issue. So that's, and we've had several of those, and they are quite, obviously, by the nature of things, passions run quite high in those sort of cases. So they can get quite complex. Sometimes it's just, the nature of getting all the information and the analysing it against the code, and it's just some of them are actually quite complicated. In a sense, we're left with the more complicated ones because we've been moving more and more to trying to resolve things, as it were, pre a proper investigation. Actually talking to the complainant, talking to the charity, and actually trying to resolve the problem or the issue without going to a full-scale investigation. So in a sense, the ones we're left with that we're doing full-scale investigation, by their nature, are the ones that can't be sorted out simply informally.
Thank you, Jenny. I will, I think, just take the last two online questions. Thank you to everyone in the room and online who's been asking questions. And I think the first of these I might pass to Gerald, and then the second definitely to Toby as it relates to the board. And I'll read them both out. So Gerald first, and then Toby, you've got a moment to think as well. Gerald, the question to you is, I'm just joined the fundraising sector as a new fundraiser. What do you think is the best way or place for me to quickly learn up what you think I need to know about fundraising regulation? Very practical question, thank you, very helpful. And then Toby, question is, a couple of times it's been mentioned that the fundraising regulator will be recruiting to its board. Do I need to have a lot of experience in regulation or working with a charity commission or similar if I'm going to be suitable to join the fundraising regulator board? So Gerald first, I think you're a young-ish fundraiser who wants to be able to know what they should know to practice well. What's the best advice you can give for that?
Well, I think there are a number of approaches. I think one would be to talk to all the good people in this room who do the fundraising job in one way or another every day of their working life. So learn from your peers. If you want to know more about how we regulate what we do, look at the resources on our website. Engage with us if appropriate. Come and talk to us at events like this or where we turn up at other engagements. There's a wealth of information out there. The Chartered Institute of Fundraising has loads of it as well, which is often about day-to-day operational process that sits alongside the guidance that we give about policies and processes, and above everything else, get to learn and treat the Code of Fundraising Practice as your guide, philosopher and friend.
Thank you, Gerald. And Toby, question about the board. Are you looking for a particular type, or actually is this person put forward what they think is interesting?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is we're looking because, quite properly, the board has term limits, and there are a number of individuals who, having served the board very well, are now approaching the end of their time, including, sadly, Sasha. But that's simply good governance. Board members have often in the past had a role either running a major charity or being in charge of fundraising a major charity or being trustees of charities. But that is not a necessary requirement. What we're looking for are people who are going to make a useful contribution to the board's work. If people want to apply but can't say I've done this and done that, then they've got to make the case as to why they'll be making a unique and valuable contribution to the board. But we've certainly got an open mind. We're not looking for identikit board members, nor indeed for identikit replacements for the people who are reaching the end of their terms.
Thank you, Toby.
And there is the opportunity immediately after this meeting, as I understand during the break, to talk to one or two existing board members about what the role is, or what the role of being on one of our committees is, so that if people are interested, I appreciate that doesn't help the person who's come in online. However, that opportunity is available today here at this meeting.
Thank you, Toby. So thank you everyone who's asked questions, and indeed thank you to everyone who's spoken at this morning's event. I'm afraid that is all the time that we have for questions. If you did have any further questions and you're here, as Toby just said, please do stay if you can and join us in the foyer where some of our staff, who are all identifiable because they're wearing the purple fundraising regulator lanyards, will be there and be able to chat and answer questions. And as Toby just said, please don't forget that if you're interested in finding out more about joining our board or our board subcommittees, our Vice Chair, Margaret Moore. Margaret, if you could just raise your hand towards the back of the room. There's Margaret, just there. And raising a crutch, even more easy to see. Our Vice Chair, Margaret Moore, and our Head of Communications and Corporate Services, Daisy, who's just here at the front and waving, will also be around and really happy to talk to people who are interested in learning more about the board or the subcommittees and how they might be able to be involved. But a big thank you to our speakers today, everyone who's been here in person in the audience and on the live stream in audience. As I said, both audiences were actually about the same size, so it's great to see so many people participate. There will be a recording of this part of the event available online and circulated in the Fundraising Regulator newsletter. So please do share that with any colleagues who haven't been able to be here today, but you think will be interested in the event. And thank you so much to everyone who's joined us online and in the room, and for working with us here at the Fundraising Regulator. Thank you.